Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Struggle Is Not Real. And this is where we take basically popular, I don't even know my words anymore. We're just dealing with rain here, left and right? So we're taking these long-term held-on beliefs and providing actionable strategies to empower our listeners to take control of their time, increase productivity, and achieve breakthrough results. And today's topic is going to be that talent is not enough. I'm very excited about having this topic, Michael and Kristin, at this time of year, because even though that this NCAA tournament has not played out that way, you can almost look at these big upsets that happen every year in March Madness and realize that talent is not enough. And if you're a Kentucky basketball fan the last couple of years, you definitely realize that talent is not always enough. And it's been interesting to see. I always will say that a young freshman basketball player who's got his eyes on the NBA will have to have a really good game to beat a senior who might be playing in their last basketball game of all time, and they know once they lose, it's all over, especially if there's a group of seniors that have been playing together for a long time and have that kind of continuity. So I'm really excited about this topic, but before we get into it, Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Speaking of teams that maybe got a little bit over their heads, Michigan last year was losing. It was just getting creamed in the football field. But at the end of the year, they pulled it together and they had some really good games. And what happened is that they just didn't give up. They did the work. They did the work, and they couldn't throw a pass. They could barely run the ball, but they won their last two games and against Ohio State and Alabama. And it's not because of talent. They were out talented on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, because they had a ton of kids drafted the year before, right? I mean, they lost a lot of guys in the NFL.
And our head coach
and our
best quarterback, So
the really strong points there. And somebody once said something along the lines that talent is worthless unless you execute. I don't know if there's any truth to that. So, Kristin, how are you today?
I'm doing really well, Mike. Thanks for asking.
We were just talking before the show started about all the people here dealing with weather and all the people up in Michigan dealing with weather. And obviously all the storms that are going through. So if you are along the path of one of those areas that are dealing with a whole bunch of weather, I hope you stay safe. And man, it sounds, what you all were telling me about northern Michigan sounds just incredibly bad.
It's not just northern Michigan. Same time, southeast Michigan got hit with a tornado on the west side of the state. So they're getting power back to people now, but at one point they were estimating somewhere between 350 and 400,000 people were without power.
Man, unbelievable stuff. And I'm home alone right now because Chrissy and Rocco are in High Point, North Carolina, getting Rocco registered for classes for next year.
Awesome.
And Chrissy sent me this beautiful picture of a bright blue sky, and she said, "I'm sweating," and I'm like,
yeah, I love spouses.
It's not okay.
Yeah.
So we're here today and we're going to talk about this idea that talent is not enough. And just to kind of give you just an idea of where we're coming from, ancient legends to modern media, society has long celebrated the idea of natural talent as a magical formula for greatness. Think of Greek myths like Achilles, whose strength was said to be innate, or Mozart, often portrayed as a prodigy who effortlessly composed masterpieces. Even today, we marvel at child prodigies like Michael Kearney, who earned a college degree at just 10 years old, or look, this is a good Italian name, Alberto Cingolani. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. Who was a 7-year-old piano virtuoso performing Mozart with ease. These stories feed into the narrative that exceptional ability is something you're simply born with, a gift exclusive to a lucky few. And I want to definitely get into the idea of the gifts that we're giving when we get into this as well. But here's the catch. While talent can provide a head start, history tells us that it's far from sufficient. Consider figures like Wilma Rudolph, who overcame paralysis as a child to become an Olympic champion through sheer perseverance. Or Michael Jordan, who famously didn't make his high school varsity basketball team, but used that setback as fuel to train harder than anyone else. And if you ever go back and watch his Hall of Fame speech, he actually calls out the guy who made the team instead of him. And so it held him all the way through the Hall of Fame. I love it. Their success wasn't about innate ability. It was about grit, determination, and deliberate effort. So why does this belief that in talent persist? Psychologists call it the naturalness bias, where people tend to admire innate ability more than hard-earned skill. But the mindset can be dangerously limiting. When we overemphasize talent, we risk undervaluing the power of hard work and deliberate practice, the true drivers of mastery. Malcolm Gladwell popularized I know Michael's got something to say about this, popularized the 10,000 hour rule, emphasizing that greatness requires sustained effort and focused improvement over time. Even those who seem like naturals have spent countless hours honing their craft. Relying solely on talent can lead to complacency. It's easy to rest on your laurels when you believe your abilities are fixed, but success demands growth, a willingness to stretch beyond your comfort zone, and embrace challenges as opportunities in learning. So we're going to talk today about deliberate practice, having a growth mindset, knowing those complementary skills like making sure you understand time allocation and goal setting, and how you seek feedback for that growth and use that feedback for fuel, for sure, as like Michael Jordan does. And Michael Jordan famously even has that quote, like, the fundamentals don't change, just your attention to them. And these guys who seem like they have it all, have unbelievable work ethic. And I know from all my years coaching basketball, I'd be like, man, that kid's so talented, but I wish he had that kid's work ethic. And it's such a rare occurrence when we get the work ethic aligned with the talent, and that's when the greatness really comes about. And Michael, I know you also have worked with thousands of clients through the 12-week year. What's your perspective on talent and achievement from working with those clients?
Well, I think the biggest talent you can have, the best talent you can have, is a work ethic, right? I think that's a talent. I mean, you were talking about Michael Jordan, and I was just, sorry, Kristin, I was looking a little bit of YouTube at lunch today. She hates it when I get on YouTube. But anyway, I was watching a video, and it's a video of Michael Jordan in the Olympics, and they were playing the coach. I forget the guy's name, was coach of Detroit. Anyway,
Chuck Daly was the coach of the Olympic team.
Daly,
he was the coach of Detroit. Yeah.
So Daly had them all out playing, 18 holes in the morning golf before the game that evening, and then Jordan stuck around for another 18 holes. So he played 36 holes of golf before he went to the game. And he asked to be assigned to and you know the story probably better than I do, but he asked to be assigned to a point guard apparently that had been dissing him in the media. Okay, now this is Michael Jordan. He probably can't lift his hand with all the rings on it, and he's just so successful. And he was pissed off that this guy was dissing him in the press, so he guarded him all night. He was on him all night. He scored, I don't know what he scored, but it was basically nothing, and he just was humiliated. And so Michael Jordan, at the end of his career, had this desire to just dominate. It was something about him and his work ethic that just changed everything. So I think if I was going to have a talent, and I was going to pick one when I was a kid, it'd be I would want to have that work ethic of guys like Jordan, because I think that makes a huge difference. But yeah, this concept of deliberate practice, it is a favorite one of mine, and I'm not going to hog the mic. I know I probably already used.
Well, I really want to just chime in a little bit more about that 92 Dream Team, because there's some famous stories of this whole very thing coming out of that. There was this story about they were in their first practices, and they split up into Magic Johnson's team and Michael Jordan's team, and Magic's team was winning. And Magic famously said to him, like, if you don't turn into Air Jordan soon, we're gonna beat the tar out of you guys. And it just turned Jordan on, and he just took over the entire thing, and they cruised to the victory. And that's a scrimmage, like no one's watching. And then they would scrimmage the college kids, and one of the college kids was guarding Larry Bird, and basically was saying that he was too old. He's like, this isn't 1985. And Larry Bird would catch the ball, tell the kid exactly what he was going to do to him, and just say, it's not 1985, is it, huh? And just dog the guy the entire way. Like, they would find that fuel. There's so many good stories that come out of that era of basketball. It's crazy. And, I'm a little bit of a basketball junkie. Keep going, Michael. Sorry.
Yeah, that kind of a drive is really critical. And I think that's what we see in the 12-week year too, when people are coming to us to help them hit their goals. It's the folks that are going to be the most successful are the ones that are able and willing and want to do the work. It's sometimes difficult to do, but they're willing to engage with it. And I think that's really what deliberate practice is. It's doing the difficult stuff. It's not cruising on your talent. It's not outperforming people because you just have more skill. It's really getting in the work. And I want to talk, I don't know if now's a good time, but I want to come back to it. This concept of, I think, sort of the P approach to getting better in life. And it's not PE, it's PEA. By the way, but it's
go ahead. Let's do it.
So in the 12-week year, one of the things about deliberate practice is that it's about practice, right? And in most things, you can go practice. You can practice a piano. You can practice your jump shot. Lots of things you can do. You don't have to get better in the game. You get better before and after the game. Well, when you're working, though, you're forced to get better in the work, to get better in the game. And there's three things that you can do to really get better at what you do. And that is what I call the P process. The first is to prepare and plan, right? So before, let's say it's a sales meeting, you want to get better at selling. So before the meeting, you prepare for the meeting, right? You create an agenda, you create a plan for what you're going to say. What's the outcome you want to get? What's the conversation you're going to have? You create an agenda that's going to walk you through that and get to the close, or to as best you can get to the close. So you create a plan that's going to make that meeting successful. You don't just show up in the meeting thinking you're going to talent your way through. You show up with a plan, right? The agenda for the meeting. And then in the meeting, so the E part is you execute the plan. You don't get off plan, you work the plan, and you're paying attention to how it's going, right? During the work, you're watching. Are they reacting to me the way that I expected them to? Do they seem interested? Is this something that they want to talk about? So I'm paying attention, and I'll adjust on the fly, right? I'll deviate from my plan based upon how it's going so that I can get to the result. And then whether I sell or I don't sell at the end of that meeting, most people just say, oh, that's done. Where's the next meeting? The people that get better in the work, they do this after action review. That's the A part of the P, right? So it's plan, execute, and after action review. And the A is really the important part, because that's where you learn. How did it go? Here was my plan. What worked, what didn't work? What would I change next time? You write that down so that you're getting better by figuring out what you're going to do next time. And then you take that when you create your next plan and you add that to your plan, and you get better and better and better. That's how you get better in the work. And they say there's a 10,000 hour rule to get better. That's the time you're taking it. It's the planning, it's the experience in metacognition, and then it's the after action review.
Kristin, I mean, we could probably just start unpacking that whole thing right there, and how you do that from a coach's perspective. I want to start off though, and I wasn't necessarily like it's, you all know how I am. My brain starts working when we start having these conversations, but we talk about having this determination, this grit, and whatever else, and that really goes back to making sure that when you set out on something that you're committed to, instead of just being interested, right? I mean, have you ever had any client, Kristin, that you've worked with that's been interested in doing something, that's been able to have that kind of grit and determination and overcome the challenges ahead? You
can't use me as an example, Kristin.
That just blew me out of the water. No, it's very, very common with people. Everybody's got great ideas, right? And we say this 1,000 times. Those ideas are worthless unless you execute. But it's taking those great ideas and tying them back to a natural skill set that you have, and then digging more deeply into that skill set, aspects of that skill set. There is a book called Talent is Overrated by Jeffrey Coleman, and it talks about that 10,000 hour deliberate practice rule. But what he talks about in there is he goes deeper into some stories around Jerry Rice is a great story.
One of my favorite athletes of all time.
So arguably, one of the best, but he was on a level playing field with other people in the professional football arena that had just as much talent as he did. So when you get to that level of talent, what differentiates you from the same person on a different team? And so he looked at what he did and the things that he was good at, and then he started looking at other elements of, how do I get the football in the end zone faster than anybody else? And he started analyzing what he called his explosive first step. It was critical in his success of getting that ball in the end zone based on that first step that he took. So in coaching, it's what's the next logical step, and then challenging even more, what's the next logical explosive step? Things that you're not looking at, things that you're taking for granted. So it's not just being deliberate in 10,000 hours of your talent, i.e. a football player, but elements inside of your profession. So as a realtor, what are things that you are innately gifted at, things that make you better than some of the other realtors out there? Because all things being equal, y'all have the same tools to do the job in the market space, right? It's how you do that job that differentiates you and creates that level of success.
And you all got to experience that firsthand about how wonderful I am. So, but and so many things to unpack, because when you're talking about Jerry Rice, I'm thinking of Michael's probably better example of being Tom Brady. And just how those two guys, from a deliberate practice, like they were deliberate with every life decision they made. Like Jerry Rice's workouts and diet were legendary. Tom Brady's like even his sleep habits and making sure the sheets he was using were all designed to go for the optimal performance. But I really, Chris, I want to get back to this, like, so because this kind of goes into the whole planning idea of the P, but that explosive next step is something I've never heard you talk about. That really is intriguing to me, because I think sometimes we get bogged down in the, like, maybe the little tiptoe steps that we could take, and we almost avoid the explosive next step. So talk to me about how you unpack that a little bit with the people that you're coaching with. And really, when we put together a plan, is it just a series of what the explosive next steps are?
Not necessarily. It's kind of dependent on the person. You mentioned that there's the interest, there's the commitment, there's the great idea. Am I willing to sit through hours? So I'm going to pause there for a minute because my brain's going too fast. So when I have conversations with people, they come with a problem. And it's like, I want to fix this problem. You're going to help me do it. We're going to create a plan. I'm going to do this plan. I'm going to be amazing and successful. Where it breaks down is the film analysis. Do you know how many thousands of hours Jerry Rice watched film of himself, of other people? He overlaid those films to watch where he was 6 inches in one direction versus an opponent. Most people aren't willing to do that kind of work. They get bored with it. Or there's also the whole mindset of confrontation. You've got your own biases, and you go into watching this metaphorical film play in a way that has to help you confront your thinking and your comfort zones. And you might realize you don't have the ability you thought you had, but maybe it's just in that position. And maybe we need to change positions. So that's how I unpack it with my clients. We have to analyze the game film a lot.
Good stuff right there. Michael, what do you want to say about, let's start with that P, about how we put that plan together?
Absolutely. I was just going to add, I was just got to add something to what you were saying. What about Allen Iverson? Remember that famous line, practice.
We talking about practice?
Yeah.
Not a game.
Right. But he was pretty successful. I mean, he was successful.
He very much was successful. Never won a championship.
Yeah, that's true. And was he as good as he could have been? We'll never know, right? But now, on the other hand, he was just talking about a practice he missed. Maybe he was a devout practice guy. I don't know. But it's an interesting juxtaposition. Somebody who's really successful physically and successful in his career doesn't believe in practice. But I think that's an anomaly that doesn't happen very often. And I think behind the scenes, he probably practiced quite a bit, would be my guess.
Well, I think a lot of those guys actually practiced. I mean, it wasn't the practice that the team was having that really made the difference.
Right.
They all could be in the same practice that the team was having.
Right.
It was, you hear about it with Kobe Bryant, especially, like the fact that he probably already had a 3-hour workout, did his, as far as a 3-hour basketball workout, then got into the gym and did weights and everything else and cardio work. And then, like, he wanted to legitimately, when he had his team practice, he wanted to be tired like he would be in the game.
Yep.
To have that kind of thing already. He wanted to already have up his 1,000 shots and whatever. I mean, it's and of course he's got a whole thing about the Mamba mentality based off that whole concept. And but I want to get back. Go ahead, Kristin.
Back to Jerry Rice's practice in the off season. That's another piece to being, world class at what you do, is you practice when nobody else is practicing. When everybody's going on vacation or school's out for the summer, you're doing things that nobody else is doing. And the stuff that he did in the off season was far more rigorous than what he was doing during the season. So much so that they wouldn't even release his off season regimen or his practice because they were afraid it was going to hurt people, and that players were going to come into the season trying to do what he had done during the summer and hurt themselves.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And really, that whole concept there too of almost making your practice so hard that the games are easy is a really interesting kind of like sports concept too that I think is fascinating. And they talk about it with the 96 Kentucky basketball team that won the national title, is that, they would talk about who was now one of the teams that was in the Final Four with them was another team from the SEC. But they would said, hey, who's the hardest opponent you play? Well, they had 9 guys playing in the NBA. So they said, well, the team we had to go play against in practice every day is the second best team in the country. And just how important that kind of mentality is. All right. So let's break down this whole the P analogy.
Sure.
We've got the practice part down, I think, but the plan, the deliberate practice also requires this deliberate plan. What are the components? How are we putting this plan together? Should I just go read the 12-week year and then figure it out, or how are we doing this?
Well, you could do that, but I can give you the Cliff Notes version right now. So there's really two things when you set a goal. You set goals. One is to get better in the work, right? To get better at your craft, get better at what you do. It's a capacity growth goal, whatever you want to call it, but you're getting better, right? So there's a goal to get better, and there's a goal in the short term to close the business, to hit a certain number of sales, whatever. So you've got this outcome goal that represents you're harvesting the current time frame and getting some money or some other benefit in that work, right? So it's the payoff. You have a plan to get to the payoff, and you've got a plan to get better in the work. And so, in that example I was using about a sales meeting, maybe what you want to do, the plan to get better, is you want to, within the first 5 minutes of the conversation, you want to have discovered the number one unmet need in financial services or whatever you're doing, right? So it's my goal in the process. Usually it takes me longer, but today I want to get to that point in minute 5. Where we get this aha, this is the problem. You think it's a problem you want to solve, and I want to help you solve it.
Which is the equivalent of Jerry Rice's first step, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy. Exactly, good comparison. And then also, I have the goal of the meeting. I want to close some business, right? So I've got the outcome goal, but I've also got the process improvement goal, and that's what you do in the planning. Most people just have the outcome goal. If they create a plan at all, they miss the part about what I can do to get better at it.
And so, Kristin, when people are setting these goals and building these plans, do you do something as a coach to like almost test to see if they're actually interested versus if they're committed before you kind of go down a path and waste a whole lot of time with them? Like, do you try to flesh that out?
It's probably most times already fleshed out. You've heard the expression, people will show you who they are. You need to believe them. And in the conversations leading up to the part till we get to the plan, you find out who they are and what they're doing and whether they're interested or not. And I've usually confronted before we ever start the first week's execution with a plan.
Okay. And because that's really where it shows up in that execution of the plan, right? And
it does.
You talk about it all the time too, like an execution score of 35% in the first week is not necessarily a bad thing, but if it's a continual thing, then it starts to show. That's where they start to show up, I guess, that maybe they're not as committed to the plan as they said they were. Maybe they're just interested. Exactly.
I mean, welcome to our world with what's happened in Michigan this week. I don't know. I can't speak for Michael and what his plan score was this week, but I think yours was far better than mine was this week. I did 2 critical things that needed to be done, and only because I had to show up for somebody else to do it. That was a part of my strategic plan, not my clients. Everything else was reactive to our kids and everything that we needed to do with that. And so I scored 27% this week. That's the lowest I've ever scored in all my years as a performance coach. But here's the thing. Even with everything that happened, I still had 27% execution on my strategic plan.
Which is phenomenal, right? I mean, and sometimes you need that kind of perspective to make sure that you're executing. But then what do you do next week to make sure that it's not 27% again?
Well, so I know next week we're not going to have ice. I've checked the weather. I know that gas
is to have no ice. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, so you look at the things that's kind of counting the cost. Are there things that are going to get in the way? What's going to prevent me from getting back on that execution wagon and focusing strictly on those most important things? And it starts with planning your week. You print out your plan. You look at what's going on with your plan, how it lines up with your week, where you need to make some time adjustments maybe, and then you just begin your execution.
Go ahead, Michael. You guys going to say about execution?
Yeah, just in the context of, look, there's an aspect of things change all of a sudden, right? In the ice storm that just basically stopped the northern part of the state. You can't plan for that. I mean, you might be able to see there's a storm coming, but you're not anywhere close to know what it's going to be. So and this is another sports analogy, but Nick Saban is a guy you might have heard of, Mike, and Nick had this thing called "What's Important Now," right? Mm-hmm. And it's not a new thing, but this first time I heard it was when he said it. And
I think it's actually a Lou Holtz thing, by the way.
Yeah, it could be. Okay, yeah, Lou Holtz, but I don't like Notre Dame, so I don't want to credit those guys. I'm sorry, I love Notre Dame, but I think they're playing us. But here's the deal: that mindset of okay, things have changed. Now, what's important, and then acting on that, being flexible enough, because sometimes you just can't get the other stuff done, and beating yourself up for that. it's just the way the world is. Sometimes natural disasters, we just had a drop in the stock market, a huge drop in the stock market, right? And so a lot of people move into that what's important now mode. And there's opportunities in all situations, always things to get better at. And so, I think scoring 27 might be the best score ever, Kristin, because you were so distracted and so pulled away from the core. Getting 27% done may have been your best execution effort ever, because you got that much done in the midst of the chaos, right?
So you say that, and that's kind of where you dig deeply more into your talents, right? The things that I did execute on were actually, in the grand scheme of things, the most important of the most important in my plan, and those got executed on.
And then, Kristin, though, like, I think there's probably a lot of people, though, when everything starts to crumble around them, like, they just almost revert back to just being able to check things off the checklist, and they might just check things off even if they're not the most important things. Maybe it's the low-hanging fruit. And is that necessarily a bad thing, or like even just creating that momentum and maybe working towards getting that bigger stuff done?
That's a great question, Mike. The coach in me rails at, no, don't go back to a checklist. But at the same time, action is the most important thing to moving forward. So even if it's not the right action in the moment, action breeds action, and you'll continue that momentum. So I'm rethinking my whole answer that I was tempted to just spit out at you and say, yeah, there are advantages to if you're not executing strategically. If you can get back to executing to-dos and doing those consistently, action will breed action, and we can bring you back to that magenta line, that bubble in the center, and we can get you executing again.
But then it goes back to a previous episode we did where you could also mistake being busy for being productive and get too caught up in that. So you have to have some sort of self-awareness, I think, with that as well. So
yeah, careful. Yep.
Well, back to P, it's the planning, having a written plan, writing down on paper what's the most important things that you need to be executing on. That is vastly different from a to-do list.
Then the last thing on this whole thing is the after action review. And this is something that I think is just brilliant. And Michael, talk about the best way to kind of conduct that after action review, and mainly making sure that your own biases don't get in the way. And how, even if you didn't hit your goal, how you can get some really positive information from that after action review.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to talk about that. So, that's what most people don't do. They may, if they have a goal and a plan, a lot of them just don't get to the point where they do the after action review. And I think it's important because it's how you get better. It's how you intentionally can learn and adapt and grow. If you don't do that, you're going to miss out on really a lot of the learning opportunities that exist. And so in the after action review, what I want to do is I want to look at, and so I'm going to give you an example, not a theory, but an example. So in the 12-week year, there's an after action review process built in. So you start the week with a weekly plan. Monday morning, first thing, you print off your plan. You're working from a written plan. These are the things I got to get done this week to be on track with my 12-week goal. So that's the roadmap of all things that are most important. And then as you go through the week, you're executing the tactics, you're doing metacognition, you're moving stuff around, you're getting things done. But at the end of the week, we do the after action review. And you mentioned, how do you avoid being biased in that action review? And I think that's a really great question. So in the 12-week year, what we do is we have what we call key metrics or key measures, and we have an execution score. And so we look at key measures which are tied to your goal, right? So let's say you have a goal of $10,000. You're obviously going to be tracking sales, right? 10,000 in sales. You want to track sales because you want to know where you are every week. And then the other thing you're tracking is the things that lead to the sales, right? So maybe it's the opening meetings, or it's the number of referrals you're asking for, or the referrals you got, whatever that is. But it's the number, let's just call it the number of new people you're adding, to your pipeline that week. You've added 2 people, you met with them, you got opening meetings with them that week. So I'm tracking opening meetings, and I'm tracking sales, right? So those are my key measures. Those are my lead and lag measures. I'm also going to track my execution, score my execution. And so if I had 5 tactics in my plan and I got 5 done, I scored 100%. If I got 4 done, I scored 80%. So I want to look at that. And in the after action review process, I'm looking at, how did I execute my plan? I'm looking at my execution score, and I'm looking at, how did I move my numbers? And based upon what those things tell me, I do one of 3 things. I keep going next week because it was great. or I didn't score so well. So next week I got to figure out how I can get those tactics done, even though I'm as busy as I am. So I figure out some other ways of getting the tactics done, right? Or if I scored the tactics good, but I didn't make any sales, then I got to go back and look at what am I doing wrong in those sales meetings that I'm not getting any closes? What can I change up in the sales meeting? So, or maybe I need to see more people. Maybe I need to adapt my plan a little bit because I'm executing my plan, but I'm not necessarily getting in front of the right people. So maybe I got to figure out how to get in front of better people, whatever that is. But every week, that's the after action review. And if you do that every week, then every week you're kind of ratcheting up just a little bit in how well you're doing the things you need to do to hit your goal. And that's so powerful because that's how you get better. That's how you hit your goals. And I think, as you say that, Mike, avoiding the bias is key because you got to have facts. It can't be opinion based. It can't be feeling based. It's got to be fact based because you don't want to confront the truth, right? You talk about biases. I don't want to confront the fact that I didn't ask for referrals. I don't want to confront where I didn't do what I knew I needed to do. And if I don't confront that, I can't change it, right? So we tend to give ourselves huge passes. And we could do that and we could be biased as long as we aren't looking at the numbers. That's what the numbers are. They keep you from being biased and listening to your own BS.
There's actually a mental model that supports that. It's misaligned feedback loops. Without proper feedback, you'll just reinforce the poor habits and fail to identify the areas where you can improve.
Wow, I'm smarter than I thought.
Measuring that progress and execution on a weekly basis and evaluating where that, how did you progress and did you execute, and then figuring out the adjustments you have to make, though, is key. So from this whole conversation, because I can't believe we've already gone 32 minutes. This has been one of my favorite conversations. But we really empower you to say, hey, you know what? Execution is going to beat talent every time. And if you're talented and you execute, then you're a one leg up. And I think at our office, we talk about the definition of joy being understanding those natural gifts and abilities that you have and how you can best use those to share those with other people who need them. And that's where the execution piece comes in. And really, at the end of the day, if you're able to do that, the execution can be fun and be easy as well, too. It doesn't always have to be daunting if you're really tapping into what your gifts and abilities are. And what you're executing on is leading you to opportunities to use those natural gifts and abilities. I really feel like that's what should be taught, and especially in high school. I wish they did more of a better job in high school, a better job in high schools of really helping these students understand what their natural gifts and abilities were, and then you could spend your 20s learning out how to unpack those. So as I get another weather alert coming through right now, I think that's a good place for us to stop. Anything you guys want to add before we go?
I got to add one thing. Kristin, you look great on camera. You look great anyway, but I just got to say,
man,
so, she's my wife, by the way. So.
Thank you.
I was actually noticing that too. Like my curls are actually rocking in this.
I was thinking that about you too, Mike, but I didn't feel comfortable saying that. So.
All right. Well, you guys have an amazing weekend and day. We'll be here next Friday at 1:00 to continue the conversation. Next week, I didn't check. I need to check and see success is not linear, which means I'm sure we're going to get into something called the emotional cycle of change and all kinds of other kind of things about the how success is not linear. Another good book to prepare for that is George Lennard's Mastery book, which I love. I think I turned you two onto that book too, right? Did I? Is it one?
You did, me anyway.
Yeah. So those things will come up next week as well. So we will see you then Friday, 1:00. Everyone take care.